Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to a bonus edition of Home Education Matters. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's Wednesday and I've got a Home Education Matters podcast pinging into my inbox. What's going on? But it's okay. I just thought we would have a bit of a short, special one-off podcast today. Just me chatting to say a few things to you because I don't often get a chance because I'm always busy interviewing people. So I wanted to take a podcast today just to say hello to all of the listeners and also to share with you that we hit 5,000 downloads last week, which is very exciting. We are really thrilled to actually hit that many downloads, considering we are a little podcast and we're in a small but perfectly formed community, the Home Ed community. So to hit that many downloads is fabulous and we're really excited. And I also wanted to say that obviously most of our listeners come from the UK, but we have listeners all over the world. And for anyone listening, I want you to know that I see you where you are. Don't worry. I see you when you listen from South Africa. I do. The US, Australia, the UAE, Algeria, Canada. I'm going to reel them off. Ireland, Singapore, Rwanda. I see you there in Rwanda. Germany, Portugal, Turkey, Brazil, Jersey, France. It goes on. India, Malaysia, New Zealand. You name it. We've got listeners there. So I just wanted to say it is so lovely to have you sharing the podcast with us. And I just wanted to remind anyone who didn't listen to the first podcast why it is we're doing this. And the whole point of the podcast is that we believe as home educators that knowledge is power. And the more you know about home education and the more you know about different subjects and ways to approach it in your home, the more empowered you will be and the easier your home education journey will be. And as somebody who's been home educating for 15 years, that sounds a lot. It's not a lot. I've interviewed people who've been home educating for 30 years, so I'm kind of almost new to this. But certainly, I feel like in the last 15 years, I've learned a lot. And I want to sort of pass that on as much as I can so that you don't have to go through the same learning process if you don't want to. And it's always good to find out new things for yourself, but it can save you a lot of money if someone's been there and bought the resource and says, you know what, I'm not sure that's worth that money. And actually, we're going to be doing in our second year of the podcast, which will be coming up this autumn, we will be having our birthday. And then for the second year of the podcast, we will going to be focusing a bit more on product reviews. So if anyone out there would like their product to be reviewed by Home Education Matters, get in touch. Bear in mind, I am not going to be receiving any freebies and I'm going to be I'm going to have to, I'm guessing, if I'm going to review it, but I'm certainly not going to be providing any kind of biased reporting. So what I experience is what I get, and the same goes for my co-host, Diane. Now, if we get any resources that are for younger ages, because both Diane and we actually home educate our teens now, if we get any resources or any products that people would like us to review for younger ages, then I'll be reaching out to our listeners who can then, if they've got younger children, they can then throw these products at them and see what they think about them. And then maybe I can interview you about the product and about the service as well. So I think that's kind of exciting because I know particularly for some subjects like maths and English, at sort of key stage 2, key stage 3 age, there are so many resources. Somebody came on Homeschooling UK a few days ago and asked about maths resources, maths apps, online maths. Oh my word, there are so many. I listed about 7 just off the top of my head. And they all cost money. They're all subscription based. And obviously not all resources cost money, but lots of them do. And it's nice to be able to know what you're getting into and get a really nice unbiased review before you hand over your hard-earned dollar. So we're going to be doing a few product reviews from autumn. And I'd also like to say that we have a Facebook group. It is a lovely little Facebook group. And I put notes up in the Facebook group for every podcast that we do, including links that are mentioned as much as I can. Sometimes there's a wait between when I record the podcast and when I release the podcast, and I forget some of the links. So I will try my very hardest to go on. And my guests, normally almost all guests that I feature on the podcast, are also in the Facebook group, so you can ask them any questions in there. And the Facebook group is also really good if you wanted to come on the podcast, or if you wanted to request particular podcast topics, or if you want to just leave a voice note and I can feature you in the podcast asking any particular question. So we're happy to do a Q&A podcast at any point as well for anyone who might find that interesting. So that's one thing I wanted to say about the Facebook group. And then the last thing I wanted to say today is that I had a very interesting chat with my home-educated teenage daughter yesterday. And we were talking about the editing process of the podcasts because I've interviewed her for one of the Day in the Life episodes that we put out over the Christmas period. And I was explaining about editing the podcast, and I said, sometimes it takes a really long time because I like to edit out a lot of the ums and the knows and the kind of verbal repetitions that we all have. We all have a very distinctive non-verbal language when we're communicating that is made up of sounds, repetitive sounds. And I've only discovered this since I've been editing the podcast, because every single guest I have has a different kind of a different personal thumbprint almost when it comes to how they speak. And I have been editing out these things in order to improve the flow of the podcast and also to make it sound professional, because it's a product that I care about. And even though it's free and just winging its way on the internet, I like it to sound its very best. Well, I was discussing this with my daughter, and she made a very good point. She said that when she goes on YouTube or on TV or anything like that, all she sees is perfect presentations. She doesn't see any of the mistakes. She doesn't see any of the sort of hesitation. She doesn't hear any of the fumbles or stumbles that we have in normal communication. And she said that when you curate your presentation like that, it actually puts people who listen under quite a lot of pressure, because they listen to it and think, wow, what a like they're so articulate, or they can say things so smoothly, and I don't sound anything like that. And it's exactly like when you go on people's Instagram feeds or Facebook feeds and everything is perfectly curated so that the children are all perfectly smart and everyone is happy and everything is wonderful, and we all present a curated image. And it hadn't occurred to me that by editing the podcast, I was actually presenting a curated audio in some way. And the last thing I want is to present something that is inauthentic in some way or appears overly polished or curated, because it's a home education podcast and we're all just people who are home educating, and I just want it to be me talking to somebody interesting about whatever it is they're coming on the show to discuss. And I don't want to pretend that we are all more articulate than we are, or that we don't stumble or fumble through our words. And so from now on, I've made the decision that I won't be editing the podcasts. What I will do is I will regulate the sound levels, because sometimes I boom and the guest is quite quiet, or vice versa. So I will be regulating the sound and just removing any background hiss and things like that. But other than that, I won't be editing the podcasts. So what you hear is what we said, and any mistakes and gaps and pauses and unsure words or unscripted mistakes will all be in the podcast. And obviously we don't script any of the podcasts. They are all very, very natural and just us talking. But I will no longer be removing all the ums and ahs. Don't forget that you can listen to the podcasts on different speeds. So sometimes I speed up the tempo or slow down the tempo based on who I'm interviewing. I've had some guests who talk very fast, and then I've had other guests that talk quite slowly. And so sometimes I change the tempo, which I will be trying not to do unless I really feel that it is very difficult to understand if it's very fast, for example. But generally, don't forget that wherever you listen, you should be able to change the speed that you hear the podcast. So if you find that there's a podcast where there's a few more pauses than you're used to, or the person is speaking slower than you're used to, feel free to speed up the speed. I think you can be as inauthentic as you like when you listen to it. It's just how I present the product. I would like it to be as real as possible. So that was the other thing I wanted to say to you all today. So be prepared for unedited podcasts. I don't think you'll notice a huge difference, but if you suddenly think, did she just chuck this one out and not listen to it? Believe me, I listen to all the podcasts. I won't in future be removing the ums and the ahs, which we all naturally do. And it's part of the way that we clutter our speech, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so that is all I wanted to say. I wanted to say a big thank you for all those people who listen to our podcast. I want to say an extra special thank you for anyone who is on our Facebook group, because having a little tiny Facebook group in amongst big Facebook groups is difficult, and you can feel a bit inferior, have a bit of a complex, and no one's joining our group. But it's okay, because we have our guests on there. We have interesting discussions about the podcasts, and we have all the links for all the podcasts on there. And don't forget, if you would like to come on the podcast, do send us a message. If you have any subjects that you think would be good to cover on the podcast, and if there's any products you would like us to review, or services or resources in any way that you'd like us to review, we're happy to do that. We remain and always will be an independent podcast. We are not sponsored, we do not have advertising, and we are here to provide a free information service to the home ed community. Oh, and that brings me to my very last point, which is that as a free, completely free, information-based service for the home ed community, we would greatly appreciate it if you would share the link around in other Facebook groups. Obviously, most Facebook groups, home ed Facebook groups, are very strict about advertising. And so I'm very careful where I put the link to this podcast, because I don't want to fall foul of any rules in the Facebook groups. And the last thing we want is home ed Facebook groups that are awash with advertising. But if you have found an episode enjoyable or helpful in any way, or covers a subject that somebody raises in one of the home ed Facebook groups, feel free to link our podcast, because that is well within the rules, because it's a parent recommendation and it helps our figures. And the more people we have listening to us, the more people are empowered with knowledge, and empowered with confidence in their skills as a home educator. And you never know, the more people that listen, it may filter through to people that aren't currently home educating and who are just considering it, and this will make them feel that it's a jump that they can make with confidence. And so the more people we get listening to the podcast, the better. And so feel free to share the link around in your local home ed Facebook groups and the national home ed Facebook groups when it's relevant to anyone asking any questions. So thank you so much again. It is a pleasure. I will let you know when it's nearly our 1-year anniversary, which I think is coming up in October, November time, and look out for some product review podcasts. I have tried a lot of I've tried a lot of products in my time, and a lot of resources in my 15 years of home educating. So I can happily do lots of product reviews on many things that I have bought with my hard-earned cash and only used for one lesson and then put in the cupboard. So that I've got more than enough to keep us going for at least a year without anybody without anybody needing to send in any products or offer any links or resources. So don't worry about me suddenly going to the dark side and taking out, I don't know, free and gifted subscriptions to Maths Genie, because if I put either of my children down in front of Maths Genie, there would be a riot. So that's not going to be happening. But if I did have to review a product like Maths Genie, I would just do it myself. I'm pretty rubbish at maths, so I think I would be a great guinea pig for that. And I will be anything like that. I will be offering completely impartial reviews on those. So you can decide if it's something you want to spend your money on. And that's it. Thank you again so much for listening to the podcast, and I will see you at the next one. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.